بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I welcome you to another episode of our series Safara Al Keram, where we try to strive to be in the company of the holy angels by learning how to recite the Quran, by learning the science of Tajweed. As is our methodology, we try to start off our episode with an interesting factoid about the Quran, and then we move on to the actual rules of Tajweed. In our previous episode, we had started discussing the history of the compilation of the Quran. We'll continue along that line, and we'll say that in the early stages, it is recorded that the Quran was written down by the Prophet ﷺ. However, the primary way of preservation at this early stage was the memorization of the Quran by the companions. This is because the Arabs of that time, they used to pride themselves in their sharp memory. In fact, this was how they preserved their oral traditions. This was how they preserved their history, their poetry, their literary legacy. They would memorize it, and then they would narrate it later on. And so when the Quran came down, the companions of the time, they memorized the portions of the Quran that were convenient to them. And many of them, in fact, memorized the entire Quran that was revealed until that time. However, in the Madani stage, when the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, here we have clear-cut narrations that the Prophet ﷺ would actually command for the Quran to be written down. Once when a verse was revealed, and this is authentically narrated in Sahih Bukhari, he said, "Call Zayd ibn Thabit for me." Zayd ibn Thabit was the primary secretary of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "Call him for me and tell him to bring the scapula bone and the ink pot," meaning pen and paper of their time. So when Zayd ibn Thabit came, the Prophet ﷺ dictated to him the ayah, and so Zayd wrote it down, and it is also narrated that the Prophet ﷺ would then listen back from Zayd what he had written in the Quran. So the Quran was definitely preserved by memorization and by being written down, and we'll continue along this history in our next episode. In our previous episode, we were discussing the rules of Noon Sakina and Tanween. Remember, Noon Sakina is a noon upon which there is a sukun, and a Tanween is a double fatha, a double dhamma, or a double kasra. Moving along those lines, we have said that there are 4 rules of Noon Sakina and Tanween, depending on the letter that occurs after it. So we now move on to the second rule, and that is that of iqlab, or conversion. Okay, we have this fancy diagram here to help you memorize what we mean by iqlab. Iqlab means conversion. When does iqlab occur? Iqlab, this conversion or this changing, it occurs when a Noon Sakina or a Tanween is changed to a meme. This is why we call it iqlab. You change the Noon Sakina, or you change the Tanween from an n sound, into a meme sound. Therefore, because it is converted, we call it iqlab, which means to convert, to change. Okay, well, when does this occur? It occurs when the Noon Sakina or Tanween is followed by the letter ba. So if someone asks you, what are the letters of iqlab? You will say, ba. Only one letter. It is the letter ba. Anytime the letter ba occurs after a Noon Sakina or a Tanween, instead of pronouncing the N sound, you pronounce the M sound. Okay? And it is important when you do this, by the way, that you do a ghunna. Remember, what was a ghunna? Who remembers?
Nasal sound.
The nasal sound. The ghunna was a nasal sound. Okay? An example here is the word al-anbiya. Alif, Noon, Sakin, Ba, Ya. Okay? Here we have Noon, Sakin, Al-An. But it's followed by a Ba. So we don't pronounce it Al-An. We change the Noon into a Meme. And then we do a Ghunna. Okay? Al-Anbiya. Al-Anbiya. We change the Noon into a Meme, and we perform a Ghunna on it. Likewise, in the next example, we have a Noon Sakin followed by a Ba. Notice that this was in one word, this is in 2 words. It's the same ruling. There's no difference if it's in 1 word or 2 words or Tanween. It's all the same ruling. Here we have Min Ba'di. Min Ba'di. We have Noon Sakin followed by a Ba. How do we pronounce it? Min Ba'di. Min Ba'di. Likewise, we have Sami'an Basira. Again, we have the Tanween over here followed by a Ba. سميعا بصيرا سميعا بصيرا. We change the tanween into a meme, and that is called iqlab. One last example, زوج بهيج. Same thing applies. We have a tanween followed by a ba. So we convert the noon into a meme. زَوْجٍ بَهِيجٍ. Okay, let's recite an example. Amr, why don't you recite verse 31? The brothers look it up. Verse 31 of Surah Baqarah. It begins with وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. Why don't you recite these verses and we will try to spot where the iqlabs are. Okay? استعذ بالله. Verse 31 of Surah Baqarah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء إن كنتم صادقين قالوا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم قال يا آدم أنبئهم بأسمائهم فلما أنبأهم بأسمائهم قال ألم أقل لكم.
حسبك يا عم, جزاkallah khair. Now notice here we have three iqlabs. The first one is in the 31st surah. قال أنبئوني. We have a noon sakin followed by a ba. Notice here that the people who are writing the mushaf, they have added a small meme on top of the noon. This is to show you there is an iqlab there. Okay, to show you. If you didn't have the meme there, you should know the rule tajweed. Suppose you don't know the rule tajweed, they have shown you here that there is a iqlab. Now we discussed in a previous episode that there is a type of meme which means that you should stop. There is a slight difference between this meme and that meme. One of the differences is that this meme, the meme of iqlab, the line after the meme goes straight down. Whereas the meme which tells you to stop, the line keeps on going horizontally. Likewise, we find two more iqlabs in verse number 33. أنبئهم and أنبأهم. Both times we have the noon sakina followed by a ba. So I think that rule is pretty clear, that the second rule of noon sakina and tanween is that of conversion or iqlab, and this occurs when the noon sakina or tanween is followed by a ba. What do? You convert the noon to the meme with a ghunna. Okay. The third rule of the four is that of merging. So we have a diagram here of things merging, and these diagrams